And Commissioner Jim Phillips showing some fire for the first time, it feels like. He came out smoking, came out swinging. This is one of those things where you've wondered how they're going to handle this situation. And they had their spring meetings in Amelia Island. We asked about all the lawsuits. They said, hey, lawsuits going on, can't say much, but not particularly forceful. You know, the Florida State people and the Clemson people are basically in the meeting rooms with them. And everything was very cordial. And it just wasn't what you think when you have people who are basically adversaries in an existential fight, which is what this is for the ACC. But Jim Phillips came out at ACC Media Days and basically said, hey, we're going to fight. We're going to fight for this conference, and we are going to try to make sure this conference survives. And in a way that he has not really spoken since he got the job. It's just not something we've seen from him. So here's Jim Phillips laying out the plan.
As I turn my attention to the year ahead, I must directly address the ongoing disputes with two of our members about the contracts they each signed twice and whether they will honor those agreements. With multiple ongoing legal cases, there are limits to what I can say. But I can state that we will fight to protect the ACC and our members for as long as it takes. We are confident in this league and that it will remain a premier conference in college athletics for the long-term future. These disputes continue to be extremely damaging, disruptive, and incredibly harmful to the league, as well as overshadowing our student athletes and the incredible successes taking place on the field and within the conference. People feel passionate about athletics, and they feel particularly passionate about college athletics at their respective schools. This passion is what makes college athletics so special. But this passion can also lead to personal attacks. John Swofford is a decent and honorable man and is widely respected in our industry. He led this conference with a steady hand for over 2 decades and did so through consensus and compromise. The fact is that every member of this conference willingly signed the grant of rights and unanimously, and quite frankly, eagerly agreed to our current television contract and the launch of the ACC network. The ACC, our collective membership and conference office, deserves better. The support for our student athletes, coaches, and programs is extraordinary, and that will continue despite these disruptions. We intend to continue to fight every day for the ACC and its members, and to do so in a way that I hope makes our membership proud. Where there are disagreements or disputes, I intend to continue to deal with them in a respectful and honorable fashion. The ACC deserves nothing less. The ACC will remain a healthy and vibrant conference that competes at the highest level.
That is Jim Phillips. And where was that energy when Florida State was waiting to find out if it was going to get in the playoff or not? And I think that's where some of the Florida State people are confused, because there was none of this when Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, was out basically politicking to make sure one of his teams got in the playoff, and they were trying to get a second one. They were trying to get Georgia in there too. You heard nothing from Jim Phillips, nothing. And probably, this is my guess, he thought Florida State's 13-0. They don't need my help. They're getting in the playoff anyway. But that is the difference. That is the difference. Greg Sankey knew he had to politic, and Jim Phillips didn't know he had to. And that is where you have a disconnect. And I thought Andrew Carter, the excellent writer for the Raleigh News Observer, put it very well. He wrote a column on Monday talking about Jim Phillips and says he's an idealist in a world of opportunists. And now he wasn't using idealist as a compliment, and he wasn't necessarily using opportunist as an insult, though it could be. He's basically saying this is a guy who might not be the same as the other people he's working against. And in this case, right now, he's working against the Big 12. It's not just Florida State and Clemson. Obviously, they're working as Florida State and Clemson. Florida State and Clemson are suing them. But clearly, the Big 12 is out to destabilize the ACC. They would love to have Florida State and Clemson. Now, whether Florida State and Clemson actually want to go to the Big 12 is a completely different story. It was awfully convenient when all those leaks came out during Big 12 Media Days. Oh, the Big 10 and the SEC don't want Florida State and Clemson. They don't? I've never heard anybody in the SEC or the Big 10 say that out loud. I've heard SEC people behind closed doors say, we'd rather not expand past 16. We already have a team in South Carolina and a team in Florida. We probably don't need to do that. The Big 10 people, they say, well, if Fox were to come up with the money, but we don't know because they're not members of the Association of American Universities. But I also remember the Big 10 people saying, well, we're done. We're not expanding anymore. And then the second Oregon and Washington were available in the discount bin, they snapped them right up. So what's going on now is the Big 12 is doing what it did to the Pac-12, but to the ACC. And it forces Jim Phillips to come out swinging because Brett Yormark, the commissioner of the Big 12, is doing all the things that Jim Phillips should have been doing all along to make sure his conference survives and is robust going forward. Brett Yormark had no choice. He inherited a league that had just lost Texas and Oklahoma, or was about to lose Texas and Oklahoma, and was going to die, was essentially in a kill or be killed situation. It's interesting that Jim Phillips mentioned John Swofford, and John Swofford gets criticized a lot for that contract. But here's the thing. John Swofford realized at the turn of this century that the ACC was in a kill or be killed situation. He killed the Big East. Like, the Big East exists now, but it's a basketball conference. Its teams don't play football. What's left of the Big East is the American. He understood. That's why he took Virginia Tech, Miami, Boston College, Syracuse, Pitt, Louisville. He understood. They had no other choice. Jim Phillips, he didn't come into that with the same mandate. Basically, when he took over the league, it was try to get Notre Dame to join as a full member. And really, that might have been a possibility, except that Notre Dame was basically allowed to help craft the new version of the college football playoff, which they made it where Notre Dame never has to join a conference as long as Notre Dame is fairly good. So I don't think that's going to happen. Now, obviously, they took Cal, Stanford, and SMU, which is the weirdest fit ever in the Atlantic Coast Conference. But this has been the problem. Jim Phillips is an idealist. If you hear him talk, it sounds like he wants to go back to 1995. He doesn't like any of this paying players stuff. They fought it all. They didn't like any of the playoff stuff. They fought the expansion of the playoff to their own detriment. They joined the alliance and basically got okey-doked by Kevin Warren of the Big Ten. They need to realize where they are. And it was interesting. So, very interesting story. We don't always mention the competition here, but hey, they did a good job. Brandon Marcello and John Talty at 24/7 had a really interesting story on Monday about how come the ACC doesn't have a Feinbaum? How come they don't have a Paul Feinbaum? Where is the person who is the voice of the ACC? They have their own network on ESPN. How do they have no voice? No one person you go, that's the ACC's person. And it's crazy. They've had a network for 5 years now. Now, I have a theory. That person they had, like ESPN, which does the ACC network, which has the deal with the ACC. ESPN had that person, they laid him off. It's Danny Cannell. And Danny works for several different companies. Now, here's the thing about Danny. I know that there's a lot of folks who don't like the character Danny plays on Twitter. Danny's a former Florida State quarterback. You can hear him on the Cover 3 podcast. You hear him or you see him on CBS Sports Network. Danny kind of goes hard anti-SEC, which is a shtick he developed when he was working for ESPN. I've worked with Danny. I've done radio with Danny. Like, he is one of the best people to work with ever. He very much understands what he's doing when he does this. Is a very Feinbaum-esque type shtick that he's got going. But he does believe it, which is also fun, because when he changes his mind on something, he actually thinks about things, considers what you're telling him, and maybe changes his mind, because he changed his mind in the expanded playoff. But Danny was the perfect person for that job. They laid Danny off a couple years before they started the ACC network. And Danny could have sat around for 3 years getting paid, but he didn't want to. He wanted to go to work. And so he got jobs at like 4 different companies and went to work. That's the guy. That's who it should be. And I know some of the folks who follow the ACC closely go, no, that's not it. He just supports the football schools. And Andrew Carter, who I mentioned earlier from the Raleigh News and Observer, probably understands this better than anybody. Grew up in the region, has covered it for a long time, covered Florida State as beat writer, has covered North Carolina as a beat writer. He's like, there's no one person, because you can't get these schools. There's no identity, no real identity for the ACC like the SEC. But see, that's where the leadership should come in. And I'll put this on Swofford, because that's who was in charge when they started the network. That's where the leadership comes in and says, guys, get over this. Figure it out. That's what Mike Slive did when they started the SEC network. And they were going to decide to put Paul Feinbaum on television, because, Paul had the radio show. It was based out of Birmingham. It was syndicated across Alabama and a couple other pockets in the South. But it wasn't a nationwide show. When the SEC network launched, they decided to make Feinbaum the anchor tenant, essentially, of the network. He was going to fill 4 live hours a day, which, if you never tried to fill live television, that's very hard. And there were presidents in the SEC that said, we don't want this. This guy, you're this guy who criticizes our coaches, who criticizes our teams. You're going to criticize SEC schools on the air, on the SEC network? You can't do this. And Mike Slive's like, guys, we are in the entertainment business. We are now running a TV channel. Our job is to entertain. He's entertaining. All those wacky callers who call in screaming about Auburn and Alabama, they're entertaining. That's the job. And all these other leagues have figured this out. The Big Ten knows it's in the entertainment business. The SEC knows it's in the entertainment business. The Big 12, with the commissioner from the entertainment business, knows it's in the entertainment business. The ACC needs to understand it's in the entertainment business. But it might be too late. Jim Phillips, he did say, I'm going to fight. We're going to fight. We're going to fight as long as it takes. And a lot of people ran with that. They're like, all right, they're going to fight. This could take years. It could take years. The court cases are just beginning. But this is the problem. And I keep coming back to this. And if you watch this show often, you understand where I'm coming from on this. What is the worst thing that can happen to Florida State and Clemson if they lose in court? They have to stay in the ACC till 2036. That is the absolute worst case scenario. The worst possible thing that can happen for them. And while they will tell you that is the worst thing ever, it's really not. Like, you don't have to shut down your athletic department. You'll still be fine. You'll still play football. You'll play basketball. It'll be all right. What's the worst thing that can happen to the ACC if it loses in court? It falls apart. Everybody leaves for free. That is a much worse outcome. That is why I keep saying, while the ACC is saying it will never settle, the ACC will settle eventually. It has to, because its worst outcome is so much worse than Florida State and Clemson's worst outcome. But Jim Phillips needs to say this now. that we're going to fight. We're going to do whatever we can because he's got outside forces working on him, chipping away. That's what the Big 12 is doing right now. It's what's going on. I was laughing hysterically as the Big 12 Media Days were going on and the leaks started coming out. They're so obvious with this stuff. It's hilarious. Just hilarious. And the fact that a story would come out saying the Big Ten and the SEC don't want Florida State and Clemson, conveniently timed to coincide with Big 12 Media Days. Come on, guys. We can see what's going on here. But for Jim Phillips, there's nothing else he can say. He has to say this right now. As I mentioned yesterday, he's entered that zone where he just has to keep saying this over and over. There's really nothing he can do. Now, one thing he did say on Monday that was also very interesting is he said that he believes the ESPN relationship will continue and be fruitful, and they are having conversations with ESPN within the ACC to have, a long relationship to increase revenue streams. That's good because remember, Florida State dropped that little nugget in its lawsuit that said there is a date coming up in February where ESPN has to opt into the back half of this TV deal. And if ESPN didn't opt into the back half of that TV deal, everything else would fall apart too, because that grant of rights goes away if the TV deal goes away. Rocky Top Tom, all this conference media money crap is the exact equivalent of saying all we care about is money. That is all they care about, Rocky Top Tom. I believe they've made that abundantly clear over the years. Fortunately, there will be football coming. There is football coming. But the ACC, we'll see. Interestingly enough, there were questions posed to Jim Phillips about time slots. Because remember, the SEC now is completely owned. Their TV rights completely owned by ESPN, just like the ACC's. And are the SEC games going to start taking away from prime time slots that the ACC would have gotten? We'll see. Jim Phillips didn't have a good answer for that. So, but it's interesting because, again, both of them ostensibly have the same deal with ESPN. Now, the SEC's pays a lot more, but there is no voice for the ACC. And what you saw with the playoff is they essentially do get treated like a second-class citizen. I don't know that the leadership of the conference can do anything about that. They are locked in until 2036. They can't complain about it because they need that contract to keep Florida State and Clemson. But it's a bad situation. It's a tough situation if you're Jim Phillips. I'm not sure what else you can do. But he's gonna fight. He's gonna make loud noises, which is good because he hasn't made any loud noises yet. He should have been making loud noises last year going into championship weekend to make sure, hey, by the way, if Florida State goes 13-0, they need to be in the playoff. Like, you needed to hear the ACC commissioners saying that. They didn't say a word. They said nothing because they didn't understand how things worked. Maybe now they're starting to understand how things work. It might be too late, but at least maybe they understand. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.